Good morning. What an awesome start to the day, right? So, over the past few years, I have been on a personal journey to try and answer a question. And that question is, how do I create something timeless? In order to answer this question, I've been looking for examples in the real world, examples of individuals who have done this. And I'd love to share one of those stories with you today. Throughout the 1950s, Miles Davis and his band were considered one of the greatest hard bop bands of the day. Now, hard bop is a style of jazz where a smaller group of musicians would get together and have an intro and an outro, but during the middle of the song, typically they would find a repeating bed of chords that the band could play. And during that repeating bed of chords, an individual would step forward and improvise over top of the chords. Now, all throughout the 50s, all the different hard bop bands that existed were doing their best to try and one-up each other. And so with each progressive recording that was released, you can hear this. There's a little bit more complexity or a little bit faster music, or they're just trying to cram more notes in. And this was kind of going against what Miles was feeling during the time. And so in 1959, Miles invited his band to come down to a little recording studio in Manhattan on 30th Street, an old church that had been converted into a studio. And as these towering jazz musicians walked in that day, he handed each of them a single sheet of paper on which he had sketched one modal scale. Now, these musicians coming in had no idea what they were there to record. Literally, no rehearsal, nothing, okay? So they come into the studio, and they sit down, they get the mics set up, and Miles gives them just a few moments of explanation. And with just that, they hit record. Something truly magical happened. This is Bill Evans on piano. Paul Chambers playing bass. Can you hear the hesitation in the playing, right? They're literally just experimenting with the notes in this scale. Now, as they continue to play here, you'll notice there's a spark of an idea right here. You can snap, it's all right, This is beautiful, right? Now the rest of the band, they're mic'd up and they're ready to go. And they're picking up on this, right? Here they come. Man, I love this recording. This is a piece that I find myself continually coming back to, right? It's the epitome of cool jazz. So, Miles and his team were trying to find a way to get the entire group to improvise together. And as I come back to this piece continually, I've been looking for ways that I can try and dissect it and understand by sort of just reading about the process that they went through, what can we take away from this? And I've been thinking about it kind of like this. I've charted out from left to right the experience of the individuals involved, okay? And then from bottom to top, the rigidity of the process used. So at the very bottom, you can imagine a very rigid process, a series of steps that you have to follow. And at the very top, much more like what we just heard, right? Fully improvisation. And so as I think about these, and as I walk through these, I would love for you to think about you and your team. And which of these quadrants do you find yourself operating in, okay? In the top left, we've got a highly improvisational process with a very inexperienced team. Recipe for disaster, right? There's not enough process in place for an inexperienced group to figure out how to even accomplish much. And so you have kind of poor results here. Now, if you have those same inexperienced individuals, but you add some rigidity to the process, that process alone will allow them to actually accomplish something, right? But the quality of the work is still kind of poor. And even though they're inexperienced, these individuals know that there's much better work out there, and they sense that, and so they start to doubt the process, right? They don't have a lot of confidence here. Now, if we keep that rigid structure of process and add more experienced individuals to the scene, then the quality of the work will actually go up. And this is because the people involved are good, right? And so this is an interesting quadrant, and a lot of organizations, I think, operate here. What's interesting about this is that very experienced people, when they're dictated a very strict process, they start to not feel trusted, right? The leadership is not conveying a sense of trust to them, and so they, in return, don't trust their leadership. Now, if you're able to get to this top right quadrant, and this is an example of what we just heard, Miles, right? You've got a highly improvisational process, and you've got an incredibly experienced team. This is where really, truly timeless work can happen. And I love this quadrant because what's happening is the leadership is trusting the team. They've trusted them by removing some of the typical boundaries that might exist. And this is where real innovation can happen. Now, I'd like to dig into this idea of experience very quickly with you. We've kind of only spoken about it in generalities so far. And fluency, I think, makes a ton of sense here, right? If you think about the context of Miles Davis, had he invited just average jazz musicians down to the studio that day, they probably never would have made it through the recording, right? But instead, he invited musicians. For these people, playing their instruments was like breathing, right? It just emanated from them. So they were highly skilled, highly fluent. Now, these other two, humility and empathy, I think are maybe not quite so obvious. And to help explain, I'd love to share with you just a brief excerpt from the liner notes of that recording. These were written by Bill Evans, and he said, "Group improvisation is a challenge. Aside from the weighty technical problem of collective coherent thinking, there is the very human, even social need for sympathy from all members to bend for the common result." Now, this is a little bit of a heady statement, right? So I want to call out just two specific phrases that Bill mentions here. The first is this idea of bending for the common result. Now, think about this. We've got highly skilled individuals, and we're asking them to lower themselves in order to increase the group, right? This is not easy. You got highly skilled people, and you're asking them to do something very humble. Hard to find those kinds of individuals. And then secondly, this idea of collective coherent thinking. How do we get our teams to think as a single unit? I would like to suggest that in order for that to happen, the individuals involved, they have to understand what's going on in the hearts and in the minds of the rest of their team. And that is a beautiful picture of empathy. And Miles and his team demonstrated it beautifully for us a moment ago. So these three things are key for me, and I think about these in a lot of different cases. I think about them as I make hiring decisions, and I think about them very specifically as I consider how can I build into my team. Now, there's one other thing that I think is really important to call out about these quadrants, and that is that there's only one path through these four quadrants, okay? Let me show you what I mean. If you find yourself operating in the top left, the only way for the individuals on your team to gain the experience that they need is for you to actually put some more rigid process in place. Once you've done that, the process provides the context for the individuals to learn, to gain the experience that they need. And only then can you start to remove layers of process which allows them the freedom to do something timeless. Now, I was thinking about these ideas, and I thought I had kind of figured everything out, right? Well, it turns out I didn't. I took a trip out to San Francisco not too long ago, and I had an opportunity to visit Muir Woods. Now, Muir Woods is a forest of coastal redwoods. I don't know if you've ever seen a coastal redwood, but these trees are tremendous. They are taller than the Statue of Liberty. They're 800 plus years old. These things have survived generations of humans. And as I was walking through this tranquil place, beautiful, beautiful place, I came upon a park ranger. And this park ranger was giving me a bunch of information about the trees. And the very first thing he said to me is, he said, "How deep do you think the roots are on these trees?" And I kind of looked at, one of these trees, and I thought to myself, I think I mumbled something about maybe half the height of the tree. I don't know. He cut me off quickly, and he said, No. These trees, the roots are 10 feet deep. I was like, wait a second, so you're 10 feet deep? I literally did not believe him. And he went on to explain that as this land was settled, the people would come here and they cut many of the trees down, and they would leave one or two standing in an area. And inevitably, a year or two later, those trees would simply fall over. And he went on to say, the roots may only be 10 feet deep, but they go 100 feet out. And these trees, beneath the surface of the earth, are interlocking. Their roots are connected. He said, these trees can't stand on their own. He said, these trees hold each other up. And as I was standing there, beneath these timeless trees, I was struck with a realization that perhaps I'd been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking, how do I create something timeless? Perhaps I should have been asking, how do we create something timeless? You see, this record that we listened to from Miles Davis was a beautiful creation. But Miles had to let go of himself, right? He had to realize that the path to timeless work was not one that could be traversed alone. That record, recorded in 1959, is considered Miles' greatest masterpiece. Not only that, it's considered one of the greatest jazz recordings ever. This record, called Kind of Blue, recorded 50 years ago, still sells over 5,000 copies every week to this day. That's tremendous, right? That's timeless. As I've been thinking about this, I've had the realization that if we want to do something timeless, we've got to let go of the control we think we have. We have to remember to invest in our people over our process. And we have to realize that we cannot do it on our own. Then, and only then, can we create something truly timeless. Thank you so much.